Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order to resume our Board of Education meeting tonight. Let's start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please take your seats. So a couple of announcements. All board members are in attendance, and I did see Grace Perna attend as our student representative. Grace, are you there? Can you hear us? You might be on mute. If not, please feel free to speak up as part of your role in this meeting. Announcement for me really regarding how the elections have evolved. I would like to commend everybody in the district that has helped us to ensure that this first time ever conversion to in-face vote to a pure ballot vote is well on track to work well per New York State law, as well as some unusual revisions and understandings that have come through to support this unique occurrence. We did have several comments within the community, and over the weekend I wanted to make sure that we had a chance to talk to folks and understand their perspective on it. And I think we had some very compelling and strong conversations. At the same time, the letter we learned was developed by New York State school attorneys, seems to really carry the day to make this a very effective and proper budget and board vote. This was an example of something that I think is key to governance in a crisis, whereby experts in a field get together, and instead of one person's opinion, a group gets together and really hammers out a strong set of opinions that helps districts, in this case the 700 districts in the state of New York, to fully understand what they need to do and what they should not be doing. And we conveyed this letter, the spirit of the letter, the tone of the letter, to a lot of people in the community. And I think this won everybody over. We're now in a good position, an excellent position, to get as many qualified voters eligible, meaning they have a ballot and they have time to send it in so they can properly vote. This will be much, much different than in terms of numbers than what we typically see, which is about nowadays about 2,500 to 3,000 voters voting in person at Gowanna. There will be probably a significantly higher number, but we will ensure that there will be qualified voters being eligible to vote. I think that this has worked out extremely well as I talked it through over the weekend. Also, this is an example of interpretation of an action, interpretation of a governor's order, moving to implementation. And implementation means it's not done till it's done, meaning also we will have voters that potentially could be disenfranchised. There will be people out there that are new to the district. There will be people out there who have not voted before but have turned the right age. There will be people that have gained citizenship, gained a different address. There will also be voters out there that have never bothered to vote, but that's not a disqualifying criterion. All those folks will have access and will be simply allowed to proceed per our process that will be discussed in detail. So I want to address this because some folks had some unique comments. I think we have clearly turned the corner, but if something comes up, feel free to contact me so we can go over it in more detail. At this point, no further announcements. Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Mrs. Miller first. Anybody second? Mrs. Hoffman second. All in favor to adopt the agenda, raise your hand.
Aye.
Any nays? No nays. Motion passes. And at this point, let's turn over to Dr. Robinson for superintendent comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Presley. So tonight we have several presentations. And so I'm going to go to present mode. And just for the sake of logistics, the first presentation will be about the college process. The second presentation will be virtual college recruitment, special education, and the hiring process. And so after each presentation, I will get out of presentation mode to allow for any specific questions that the board may have related to the presentation prior. So if I could just ask to delay questions until after the presentations, so therefore things could transition much smoother. So let me transition to the agenda and presentation mode.
Okay, we can see it showing up.
Okay, so at this point, you should see a copy of the of the agenda itself. And I'm just going to make that larger. And the first presentation is in a PDF format for my for the presenters to know that it's a matter of scrolling up or scrolling down. So you let me know when. And again, I'm going to make it larger. Is that size large enough for people to see?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, so at this point, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Agostinoni, who's the high school principal, to introduce his team.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson, and thank you to the board for giving us the opportunity to kind of give you a little overview of what's some of the things been going on with the counseling center. We're going to be having them speak here in just a second, but as you know, I think it's important to point out that our counseling center, they serve as like the hub or the pulse of the school. Anything that has to do with students, they're involved. It could be students excelling in academics, students experiencing some difficulties in academics, students that were working through some mental health challenges. As we talk about this college process, students transferring in, students coming from homeschool, it's amazing. Whenever something comes across my desk or any of our desks, it's always, well, is the counselor involved? What's the counselor say? So I think it's just important to say that our counselors are multifaceted. They cover so many different things. They're very talented. I'm very excited to have 3 of them here tonight to speak with all you. And I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Drago. And just before I do that, as you all know, Ms. Drago has been an associate principal here for a while, and she took over the counseling center this year. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out what an amazing job she has done with the counseling department. She's provided amazing leadership. She works excellent with that group. That group works excellent with her. So we really appreciate all of Ms. Drago's work. She's going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff they've done, and then we're going to have the counselors take it from there. So Mrs. Drago, please go right ahead.
Thank you. And I would just like to echo Mr. Agostinoni's sentiments and thank Dr. Robinson, Dr. Wood, and the Board of Education for this opportunity. And like Mr. Agostinoni said, this is my first year supervising the high school counselors. Prior to that, I've been an administrator for 13 years at the high school. And in preparation for this new role, I spent some time in the spring and summer meeting individually with counselors to really ascertain goals for the department, where they were at, areas that they thought needed improvement. And one of the overwhelming issues that we talked about was the scheduling timeline and trying to modify that so we have a viable schedule earlier in the year. Historically, counselors spend a lot of time the end of August resolving conflicts, and that time could be much better served with student needs, meeting with new families to the district. So we really focused and had a very deliberate and purposeful collaboration with high school admin, middle school admin, and AAs to modify that timeline, which really an unintended consequence of that was putting us in such a great place in terms of preparedness when this pandemic hit in March. At that time, counselors had already had meetings with students for course selection. And in that process with juniors, we're able to give their junior students a senior planner folder that has a lot of information in preparation for college. So that was just lucky, but also a great place for us to be in. And counselors really had the position of, we're not going to wait and see what happens. We're going to get in front of this and hope for the best, but be prepared. And figured out how we could emulate an experience for our juniors that would not only match what they would get if they were in school, but how we could make that process better. And so tonight we're going to share some of the things that they've done. And again, I just want to say how proactive they were to get things up and running to best meet the needs of our juniors, but all of our students. So I'd like to introduce Ms. Celia Deneen, who's going to talk first for the high school counselors.
Thank you. And I would just like to echo what Ms. Drago said, in that thankfully we met with all of the juniors prior to March 13th for advising. So we did plan on seeing them later in the year. However, having the time to discuss the senior planner folder and go through the contents was so valuable. In each senior planner folder is excellent resources and information that's used for the juniors to guide them now in the spring through the spring of their senior year. Each folder contains a copy of the student's transcript. Also has a concordance table to compare SAT, ACT scores, instructions on obtaining a letter of recommendation, and guidelines, some helpful hints. Also, college essay questions. So juniors right now can really start to look over those questions and brainstorm ideas and work towards a draft that they will finalize over the summer and present to their senior English teacher for the editing process. On the front of this folder is a wonderful timeline and checklist. This is so helpful for juniors moving into their senior year to kind of help them each month with what tasks should get done and really stay organized throughout the process so that they feel a lot less stressed out in the fall. Next slide, please. This is our decision-making pyramid. This made it from our old Next Step to our newly designed folder because we feel it's a nice visual that we use with our students in order to help them make the best decision for their future, as well as finding the right fit. So many of the information in this pyramid is changing daily. So it's very important that the counselors provide information, timely responses to changes with the SAT, changes with the ACT, as well as overall changes in the college admissions process, which we have been providing our students. Next slide, please. Our Next Step evening presentation to parents is available on our Google Classroom page as well as our website. Please disregard any of the dates. It was recorded last year, but it is available for any parent or student to gather the information that we typically present in March. And now I will allow Lauren DiGianni to take over the presentation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren DiGianni, and I'm really happy to be here tonight. It's an exciting opportunity to be able to share with you what the counselors have done to kind of shift to this virtual platform to not only help our students, but really support parents as well. So in addition to the Next Step program that Celia had talked about, we typically go into all of the junior English classes to introduce post-high school planning and the college search process to students in a large group. This is done so that we can give them a bulk of information first and then tailor it to them individually after. So we wanted to very quickly find a way to mirror how we can, disseminate the important information to students in a way that wouldn't be too stressful, because we know that the college process can be stressful, and then you kind of throw in the pandemic and, in addition, it could be a lot. So what we decided to do was make short video clips. So basically 5 to 7 minutes on the 9 topics here. There's 9 of us over at High School East, so we each took a video, and we liked this idea because we felt like we could have the students see each of us. They could get back to a little bit of normalcy, seeing our faces, but also they would have the opportunity to break it down so that it's not a 1-hour presentation or a 45-minute, of us talking without stopping. This way they can just click on each topic. They can even go back to it if necessary, and they can review it with their parents as well. So we emailed this out to all of our students as well as parents and guardians. We also posted it to our classroom page, and we put it on our counseling center website as well. This brings us to our next slide. So as soon as March 13th came and this pandemic hit, we really had a couple of goals in mind that we wanted to quickly get together. The group texts were going. We had like a shared Google Doc page that we were writing all these ideas on. And a couple of goals we had were, 1, we wanted to provide students with information in a timely manner. We wanted to support them through this college process and make them feel like we were there for them, even though we were at home and they were at home. Third, we wanted to have a home base for all of this information so that it was easily accessible for students as well as parents. Students are familiar with the Google Classroom format and platform, and so it was kind of an easy choice for us. I do have to throw a shout out to Vanessa Kramer and John Bullington for helping us kind of make sure everything looked okay and was, right from the technology standpoint. So we sent emails out to invite students as well as parents and guardians from grades 9 through 12 to invite them to join our classroom page. And we do recognize that even though we had a ton of students and parents join, it was up right away, but it was a very, very hectic time. So a couple of weeks later, we re-invited everyone just in case they had missed the email, because there was so much back and forth communication, going on at that time. So on our Google Classroom page, students can find updates with college testing, which is a big hot topic right now. So any updates from SAT, ACT, AP exams are going to be on our website. Anytime something is updated, we will refresh it, and then students will, kind of get a push notification that something was posted to our classroom page. We are constantly scouring for different articles and helpful websites that we think students will find helpful during this time. One large program that I need to bring up is the Spring College Fair, because this is a wonderful opportunity for our students to meet directly with college admissions counselors. And being canceled, we needed to find a way to be able to provide our students with that. So we found a great virtual college fair. It was originally started and only planned to be 4 actual days. But since then, it has not only expanded to the number of colleges, there's over 500 colleges that are represented right now on that virtual college fair, but it's also gone through May 28th right now. So it's a full month of college virtual programs, virtual tours, all sorts of programs that different colleges are offering to students, as well as parents and us. And we're definitely taking advantage of all that too. This is specifically designed for high school juniors. And there's also some opportunities that SUNY has offered. They have really come through. They have programs on choosing the right campus for you, especially when you cannot get on the campus. So it really is focused on, helping the students how they can best view a virtual college tour on a website and go through a website and navigate the best way possible. Financial aid programs, even more specific programs. We just posted about one the other day that we found out about for students with disabilities transitioning to the college life, and how accommodations can vary based on different campuses. So we were able to post that. And lastly, we've been posting some free apps for relaxation, mindfulness, and different links for social emotional supports. So we really, really wanted to kind of touch on all of those points. Just want to sum everything up. Google Classroom has been a really wonderful addition to our website and our Facebook page, and it's really been a great home base for students to kind of go for any important information. Every time we post something, we're always encouraging students, if they have any questions, to reach out to us. Phone calls, emails, Google Meets, any way that they feel most comfortable with, so that they know we're with you guys on this whole process, even though it is from home. And parents too. I've talked to a lot of parents, and it's been wonderful. Really, really nice. They may hear my dog or my kids in the background, but it's been a nice experience for us all, despite all of the stress. This time I'm going to pass things over to Gretchen Lynch.
Thank you very much, Lauren. So Lauren and Celia have talked a lot about what things we put in place, how things that we had prepared for juniors, all of the communications and the varied mediums. One of the things we realized, just as if we were at school, so many of our juniors are at different points in their timeline for thinking about or getting prepared for post-high school planning. So we want to just have one slide that basically really sums up and says, we are going to stay on top of this all along. We continue to get emails almost every day from colleges, from College Board. We will, as Lauren said, continue to post those. We have been responsive to whatever medium the student needs us to call back, to email back, to meet back with them, to make sure that they are making sure that all their needs are met. On the next slide, the counselors wanted a chance to talk a little bit about additional responsibilities and to let the board know some of the other things that we have had to do through this time. One of the things I want to point out is when we talk about virtual information, I think our seniors are as concerned as our juniors. So I think that a lot of counselors have spent a lot of time reassuring juniors and seniors that this will be okay, that it will be the same. It's going to be a little bit different in the process, but what we're doing as we go along and the things that we're asking them to do is going to be their constant, and that we're here to support. We also have been working very closely with administrators and teachers. A lot of times the academic advisement is twisted into college preparatory, depending on what major the student is interested in. So we've been talking to a lot of students about their course requests, how that is mirroring into their post-high school plans, and all of the other requirements for committees and the communications with parents and students. I agree with Lauren. I think parents really have appreciated when we've called, because I think too, this isn't just for our students. I think our parents were uncertain, and I think that if we can be here, we're going to continue to do this. We are just spoke about how this week we're going to send out a reminder for our students to make sure to ask for their one teacher letter of recommendation. It won't stop. Just because we've put these things in place, we will continue to remind and to encourage our students to ask us questions or to find out if there's anything else that they might need. And the last slide. The one thing that we wanted to make sure that our community knows is that we are always taking the next steps. We have prepared for our programs in the fall already. We have secured dates. We have made ideas for what it might look like, but we don't mind if we have to pivot and go in a different direction because it's required. We are ready and willing to do so. I think that was the strength of our counselors. We all have a little bit different strengths, whether it's technology or organization or speaking. I think a lot has to do with the fact that this group really will, no matter what, ensure that our juniors and uprising seniors and all the other students with academics and everything, that their needs are being met. And just as the last bullet is to being responsive, innovative, and collaborative. And I think that's the core of what the counselors are really about. And we really want to thank you. Thank you for having us tonight. We are thrilled that we could have a chance to let you know what we've been doing as this time has evolved.
Mr. Presley.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Any board members with questions?
Bob, it's Christina. I don't have any questions, but just a comment. I am just so pleased to see how well that the counseling center pivoted, as well as the school district as a whole, but even more so with our seniors and juniors. It is a stressful time for them on a normal day. And from a parent who had 3 boys that recently graduated over the past few years from Shen, knowing what the stress was at that time without dealing with all the virtual aspects and not being physically present. And I just felt even when they were there, the improvements every year, you guys really looked at your processes and your timelines, and you always revised them each year from learning from previous years. So I thought as a parent that the process was wonderful with your timelines, keeping the students and parents involved, because as you know, students after a while sometimes still need their parents to coax them and move them along on things. But to see what you have done to provide the extra supports for our students during this time, not only the stress of dealing with applying and waiting for acceptance and all the backup documentation that they need to apply to college, but the social emotional supports as well. So I just want to commend all of you. It just shows how strong your group is, and I've been proud to serve on the CAC and seeing all that you have done to improve over the years. So thank you for that. Again, you guys rise to the challenge, and again, kudos to all of you. And I hope our students and families are really taking advantage of the way you're looking at things and the new approaches that you're providing to them.
If I could just jump in also, it's Gusta. I just want to thank the counselors. You guys are doing an incredible job with just trying to keep everybody as calm as possible during a really weird time. And the anxiety in general at this time is high for some of these kids. And you guys have really kept it as normal as possible for them. So I appreciate all that you're doing, along with taking care of yourself. So thank you.
Any other questions? Any other comments? Okay, I take that no more questions. Dr. Robinson, proceed to the next topic.
So again, transition to present mode. To see the next presentation will be Mr. Coleman on the recruitment process in a virtual environment. So just bear with me 1 second, please. Again, a copy of the agenda you should be seeing at this point. And this is a copy of the presentation, just make it a little bit larger for viewing. Go ahead, Mr. Coleman.
Yeah, good evening. Can you hear me okay, Dr. Robinson?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah, good evening. And I want to thank the Board of Education for the opportunity to come in here tonight and share with you. I think it's kind of fitting to be able to follow the counselors because so much of what we're talking about in this presentation the last is students going beyond Shenendehowa, which I think is really good to kind of talk about, especially in this new reality of which we are living. One of the things Dr. Robinson likes us to do is to talk if we have any terminology that we're going to use. So 3 terms you're going to hear me use is going to be the 20s, the 21s, and the 22s. And that's how we refer to the students in the class of 2020, the students in the class of 2021, and the students in the class of 2022. So if you hear me say the 20s, the 21s, and the 22s, I'm referring to that graduating class. Obviously, COVID-19 has thrown the recruitment of all our athletes into a new model. For the class of 2020, for the most part, they have shored up the college selection process and the decision to continue athletics at the intercollegiate level if they're planning on doing that. The challenge for the 2020s is that at the NCAA level, they have allowed student athletes to return in the spring who lost their spring season. That's up to the athlete and the college. And sometimes that has thrown, from some information we've gotten back from some coaches, that's thrown some student athletes into a little bit of a difficult situation because a college coach will come in and say, well, we want you to come in and you're going to be replacing a senior who's on the way out. Well, now all of a sudden that senior's decided they're coming back for an extra, to use their final year of eligibility, whether to pursue a master's degree or get master's credits, but that's what the NCAA has allowed them to do. So for the class of 2020, that's been a challenge. I do want you to be aware for the class of 2020, I don't know if you saw on our Shen Athletics page last night, in the coming weeks, we're going to be highlighting 41 student athletes who will be committing to the Division I, Division II, Division III, and community college level. We'll be highlighting them the week after Memorial Day once we finish up with the seniors. And I'm happy to say that we have students in the class of 2020 that will be attending schools all across the nation and competing at the intercollegiate level. The challenges for the class of 2021 and 2022, if you go to the next slide, Dr. Robinson, just briefly on the recruitment cycle. So everybody is aware the recruitment cycle has been pretty consistent. An athlete competes in their interscholastic high school season during their sophomore, junior year, and then the majority of them will go out and they'll play club, they'll play AAU, they'll play in a summer showcase circuit. Colleges utilize those windows to see kids and athletes. They see the athletes compete live. But the disruption to the cycle that's been created by COVID-19 is becoming a challenge for college coaches, and it's becoming a challenge for athletes. And I think, Dr. Robinson, if you just go to the next slide, I think I'll talk a little bit more in depth on that on the next slide. If you take our 2021s and our 2022s, so our 21s and 22s, those athletes would normally have film from their high school season. Fortunately, our 21s and 22s who played a fall and winter sport at the varsity level, they either have numbers on paper or they have film they have tape that they can send out to college coaches. One of the biggest challenges that we're facing right now is that our 21s and 22s who did not participate in the spring season do not have film and do not have times or anything that can be put on to send to a college coach. They also right now are losing the club season, they're losing their AAU season, and they're losing the summer season, the summer showcase season. So for these spring athletes that are just competing in their first varsity season, that don't have film or don't have the ability to compete right now, this is a real challenge for us. And Dr. Robbins, if you want to go to the next slide, I'll talk to you a little bit about how we're addressing some of that. I apologize for the typo in this slide here. We have been very fortunate, Shenendehowa, to have a good reputation in sports at the collegiate level. We have a number of coaches who are networked in with college coaches. And college coaches right now are having to pick up the phone. And we talked about this. We held yesterday on Monday, we held a all varsity head coaches meeting, and we talked about the recruitment process. And one of the things that we're finding for our spring athletes is our coaches are having to do a sell to the college coaches to say, hey, we've got a pitcher, we've got a midfielder, we've got a runner in this sport. We are also our varsity coaches are also being involved in virtual meetings with college coaches, and they're doing a lot of networking, which has helped out. The two things and the suggestions that I would have is that our athletes are going to need to exercise patience as they work through the process. And it's clearly going to be a much slower process than both college coaches and the athletes and parents are used to. So one of the things that I have shared with Dr. Robinson is that what concerns me is student athletes being recruited. And as you go through the recruitment process, in conjunction with what's being done in the guidance office, that all of a sudden a college shows up and says, hey, we have an offer for you at this point in the year. Because right now most student athletes in the 21s and 22s are not fielding many offers, our concern is that they're going to jump at the first offer rather than going through that cycle of, I'm interested in this school, this intercollegiate program fits my ability, the school fits where I want to further my education, and also that it's an opportunity for me to compete at the intercollegiate level. And what we're trying to have our coaches work with our parents and athletes on is being patient. So as that process evolves throughout the fall and into the winter, student athletes are understanding that it could move quick, but we also want to exercise patience to make sure that kids make the right choice, because deciding on your college and deciding if you're going to compete at the intercollegiate level is a major decision. And we want kids to give it its due diligence, not just the first offer that comes their way. Some of our elite athletes we have been successful with. They have been some of our elite athletes. Some of you saw Megan Herter the other day committed to Providence College, which was a great decision for Megan to be part of the Big East. We also, and I shared with Dr. Robinson yesterday, we are continuing to see coaches reach out for us for 21s who ran track, for 21s who have times on paper. There's the ability to have those students recruited based on projection of what students can do. The big concern that I have is for our 21s that were spring athletes that don't have film, don't have statistics, and are losing the summer season right now. And I'm worried that things are going to hit hard and fast in the fall. And rather than having kids just jump at the first offer, they're patient, and that they're working with their head coach and their parents and their guidance counselors to make good, smart decisions. So that's kind of where we're at with recruiting. And hopefully that wasn't too much information.
Thank you, Mr. Conan. Mr. Presley?
Any questions from the board on this one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Rualo, then we'll follow
Gary.
Mr. Stevenson.
No, go ahead, Gary.
Go ahead.
Gary, go ahead. Gary, go ahead.
Okay. All right. Chris, I'm looking at not just the lack of opportunity for film and times, but I'm looking at the lapse in potential development and training. With the college coaches, traditionally have times that reflect a more mature athlete, and some of these younger athletes will be not quite as far along, and their times perhaps might not be quite as stellar. Do you get the sense that the expectations of the college coaches will be adjusted accordingly?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And it's something we talked about. It's something we talked about yesterday. One of the things that's been a challenge for our coaches at Shenendehowa is we have a real 12-month developmental cycle for our athletes. And it kind of takes them to being a peak athlete when their season takes place. But we obviously have lost a lot of that over the last 3 months. So as we're going out and as we're trying to sell our athletes at the college level, Gary, there is this sense of, okay, what has the athlete lost developmentally? But I think the one thing that I am hearing from coaches is, talent is still talent, and talent is there, and talent can be seen. But I think you raise a great point that developmentally, college coaches are going to have to adjust to a new reality, because we're basically missing an entire season's worth of nationally. We're nationally missing an entire season's worth of development from these kids.
Thank you.
Good point.
Next question, Mrs. Stevenson.
Yeah, thanks. So, Chris, first a comment and then just some thoughts. First, I know I push on you sometimes, and you're always very good with me, and I appreciate that. I know you're working with your SAC kids, your student advisory. I know you are. I know it's difficult to rally at this point, so I appreciate your efforts in doing so. You got a great group of leaders there, so I would definitely lean into them at this time to develop the younger kids. And just help along on any initiative that you need. And I know I've shared that with you. So thank you for indulging me on that. My other thought was, at this time, I mean, I have one, right? That's looking at playing intercollegiate. So for them, all I'm going to send a message, and Chris, I know you would stand behind this, is they have to keep active. They got to keep at it, right? They got to keep at their drills. They got to keep going. And they got to keep working. I know as hard as it can be to maybe do it by yourself, you got to have that drive. If you want to play after, you have to have that, after post high school. I'm hoping these kids are staying fit, because it may go, like you said, fast and furious. And all of a sudden we have these athletes on the turf or running, and they're just not where they need to be. So that's a very important point. And I know a lot of our coaches, I know, are still doing meetings. So I think that's wonderful. And I know there are clubs that are doing virtual, trying to keep the kids engaged. Engagement is the key here, to keep them moving. So just a few comments, but thank you for doing this tonight.
Yeah, I want to respond to one thing you said, actually two things. The Student Athletic Advisory Committee, we're going to be meeting with them again. And again, we do have to lean into them for being a resource for their peers. But Mrs. Stevenson, I do want to hit on this point, and this is you raise an important point about keeping kids engaged and active. One of the concerns that we have as coaches is that once we are allowed to return to play, once we are allowed to return to participate, we have to do a good job as coaches and as parents to manage that for athletes, because what's going to happen is the club world's going to want to pick up, the high school world's going to want to pick up, and these kids have not been participating at that level for months. And now all of a sudden, a kid is going to be going hard, a student athlete's going to be going hard, and to be honest with you, they're going to wind up in Rick's office for overuse, because they're thinking that I've got to get to this showcase on Saturday because I missed all this in March, April, May, June, and July. And we've talked about a handful of athletes that are going to be part of our 21s that we know we're going to have to be very careful with if and when we get back to playing fall sports, they're a fall sport athlete, but they're also a spring athlete, and they're a primary spring athlete. So they're going to want to play their fall sport, and then they're going to want to go showcase themselves as a spring athlete for college coaches. And we're very concerned about us going from 0 to 90 in a short period of time. So it is that idea that we really do want them to stay fit and active right now so that they're doing their best. And I think one of the things is, Rick is constantly reaching out to athletes via social media if they want to reach out to him for any guidance. But it is a good point, but we are worried about that.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions out there? Okay. Dr. Robinson, please continue with the sequence. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Mr. Presley. So again, as I share my screen, Mrs. Mallard will be coming forward to talking about similar theme in terms of adjustments that we have made in special education during this virtual period. So at this point, you should be seeing my screen, and I'm going to open the special education presentation. So go ahead, Mrs. Mallard.
Good evening. So second slide, next slide. This consists of a reminder, if you can scroll down a little bit more, of what special educators provide to students. Their primary role is providing specially designed instruction and accommodations of classroom materials and tests, and also modifications of instruction and instructional materials. Typically, most students are in classes throughout their day where they have a special education teacher right in the general education classroom. And given the expertise and experience of our teachers, they often are providing these accommodations, modifications, and specialized instruction during instruction on the fly, if you will. So this has been a challenge for them to move into this remote learning. Next slide, please, where they have to spend more time planning with teachers, having access to Google Classrooms, and really wrapping their heads around everything that's going on in all of their students' classroom so they can provide the appropriate support. So as you can see, you have a sample elementary consultant co-teach schedule and a sample high school resource room schedule. These were developed pretty early on in the process when we didn't know how long virtual instruction would last. And we were really putting these together to serve as just a base model for our teachers. The reality is our special education teachers are working all day, every day, not only providing modifications to instructional materials, planning with teachers, but also working in small groups, one-on-one, answering emails from students and parents, providing office hours. They're really busy given this sudden change and working to adapt. Next slide, please. Related service providers are in a similar situation. Sometimes people ask, well, why can't my child just receive speech 3 or 4 times a week for 30 minutes? Well, our therapists didn't have any experience providing remote instruction. And so we set them up to provide a similar service delivery model as our teachers, knowing that initially having a 30-minute session with 5 students who are 7 years old would provide to be very challenging. Things are improving from their point of view in terms of students are learning to adapt to an online instructional group. It's almost like starting from day one where you have to set behavioral expectations and how do we interact online. But they also are spending a lot of time working with classroom teachers to ensure that their related services are supporting the students' needs as they relate to the general education curriculum. Next slide, please. So this is, as you know, our annual review season. We hold about 1,200 to 1,300 annual review meetings, and I'm happy to say we have not had any lapse in our meetings. We are inviting parents through Google Meets or by phone. Typically, they are participating through video. That has been very successful. Reevaluation meetings can be a little bit of a challenge. Every 3 years, we're required to reevaluate a student with a disability to determine whether or not they continue to be eligible for special education services. So what we have done so that we're not completing double the reevaluations next year is, for many students, we know based on their performance, based on the history of their individual assessment, and also how they're doing on their goals, their individual IEP goals. We are working with the parents to determine whether or not we need additional assessment. And if we don't, we're holding a reevaluation meeting and moving forward. There are some students we need updated testing, and we hope to get to that this summer and fall. But I would say for the most part, our reevaluation meetings are also able to go on as scheduled. And then our next slide is initial referrals. And this is a little bit more of a challenge. We are, per the federal government, held to the 60-day timeline to determine whether or not a student is eligible for a disability and to be classified as a student with a disability. And because psychoeducational evaluations rely on individual standardized assessment, it is not possible to engage in this one-on-one assessment virtually because it breaks standardization, number one. And number two, for most of our younger students, we can't be sure that we have an appropriate testing environment and that the student is fully engaged in the assessment. So much of our assessment is also based on the psychologist or therapist's observation of the student during the testing and the ability to prompt and really measure their behavioral response. So we have two options that we have provided to parents in this situation. One is we can hold a CSE meeting, and most likely that meeting will result in eligibility not determined. The other option is that we can extend the 60-day timeline with parent agreement so that as soon as we can get back together with students face-to-face, hopefully this summer, we'll be able to complete all of those evaluations and hold initial meetings before school starts. Certainly there are some students, especially at the secondary level, where they have a history of testing and they may have had an outside evaluation, or we have enough information. Typically, it's our students who have pure executive functioning disorders. We are able to go ahead and make that eligibility determination for those students. But again, that is probably our greatest challenge right now.
Mr. Presley.
Any questions from the board?
I do, Bob, actually. Michelle, just a question out of curiosity. Have you seen an increase in parent participation in the CSE annual evaluation or annual reviews because of the virtual aspect?
I have to say, we have exceptional parent participation in our CSE, so I don't think that there has been any change in actual participation. I was thinking, though, in the future, it may be a nice platform now for parents who typically would be out working all day. Now that we are really comfortable with this virtual online meeting, that may be something that is better for them so they don't have to take a half day off of work to participate.
Right. That's where I was trying to get to, was wondering if that is something that we can offer in the future, if that we felt that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
And then just one other question, and Michelle, I'm just more curious on this. For our students that are in like move classrooms, as we know, the move equipment is such an integral part of their learning. How have we been able to meet some of the needs of those students, you know, because obviously not being in the classroom? I mean, have we been working with families on ways to help the students at home without the specialized equipment and other things they could do?
Yes, absolutely. So you'll see when we look at a sample schedule, and we have obviously more detailed guidelines for our therapists, but yes, since they can't work one-on-one, and especially our OT and PTs are working with the parents, they can demonstrate the appropriate exercises. You know, a lot of what our students need who have physical disabilities is that daily stretching and continuing with their range of motion. So yes, our therapists and our teachers are working daily with our students to ensure, and our parents to ensure, that they're supporting their students at home as much as possible.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Michelle. Truly appreciate all you guys do.
Hi, Michelle. I also wanted to comment. I did hear your presentation at IPAC. I thought it was really good. It definitely gave us, you expanded upon it afterwards when talking about the toll it takes on these kids when they're not in the classroom. They very much need that exchange. And so I know that this is a struggle. Assist went out, and I've started to go through it, and I think that this is a unique opportunity because I do feel these children are particularly at risk, and we need to hear their feedback. And so the assist that went out was specific to a statewide BOCES survey, and I received it today. And what I really appreciate about it is it's a statewide conversation. It's all the BOCES that are participating, but when you go into it, everything's anonymous. And it's grouped by your BOCES, so it would be our Capital Region BOCES, and they even they're looking for some early information to know if they're dealing if the person who's responding is a parent and they have children with special education needs. So I just wanted to mention that, encourage people to do this. I wasn't clear, and maybe Dr. Robinson can comment on this, but I wasn't clear when the deadline is to respond, because when I went in, it said you have 4 days left, but the date was May 11th. Clearly, so those two numbers are out of sync. So I'm hoping that means we have enough time so that people, especially this group, the people with children with needs, because the learning environment is meaningful. It's important that it's an environment that they can continue to grow and thrive in. To have an avenue to provide feedback, and then we'll get this, and it'll help in planning for opening our schools. So I wanted to put it out there, but I don't know if you know anything more about the deadline for that, Dr. Robinson.
I'm actually looking at the email now as you speak. The exchange will be live on Monday the 18th for approximately 1 week. So it's live this week.
Okay.
So I'll make it a point, if there's a date in the exchange that's incorrect, I'll make sure that the BOCES is aware. But the exchange came online yesterday, and so it'll be live for the rest of this week.
I'm excited to see what comes out of that. And I'm assuming we're going to be able to see responses from all regions, not just Capital Region BOCES, so that we can compare and reflect and come up with a solution that works for our kids. We have a large population of kids, so I'm assuming that would be the case. But thank you, Mrs. Mylott.
You're welcome.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, please proceed with the agenda, Dr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Presley. So again, as I transition to the screen, Mrs. Bush will come forward and similar theme, providing an update on. Are you able to see the screen right now?
Not yet.
I can't see the screen. I can see Mrs. Bush. Can't see the screen.
Okay, my apologies. So let's try that once more. Okay, you should start seeing sharing at this point.
We see it.
And now you should see the agenda, and now I will open the presentation.
We see it.
Good, Mrs. Bush.
Okay, good evening, and we can go right to the second slide. The good news is we as a district are committed to hiring, and we are still hiring at this time. And one of the goals of the district and the HR office this year was to look at all of our processes that have to do with hiring, and that led to a work group with administrators, Malik Jones, Jill Florio, Kristen Lennon McMahon, Dr. Wood, Carrie Peverly, John Burns, and two of our support staff supervisors, both Ashley Pizzuti and Katie Headwell. We've been working since last August, September timeline to review all the processes. Not only is it important as a district, but it became even more important as we moved to a remote environment. And some of the things I just want to highlight, we use many resources for recruiting quality employees. Some of the resources the board may or may not be familiar with. social media, use of social media, use of the OLAS, which is an online application process, LinkedIn. We have participated in job fairs, and I have received a lot of information about virtual job fairs, so that will be something that we will also be looking to do as we move along. In all of our recruitment efforts, when we have an opening and even prior to an opening, as we're looking at what program needs are, we take the job responsibilities and align them with the profile of the Shen employee, which I do believe folks are familiar with. We're looking for the collaborative folks, the critical thinkers, and most importantly, and it's become evident throughout this current situation we're in, we are looking to engage responsible and caring individuals. And through these processes, using the profile, we're trying to bring the best candidates forward to you to join Shenendehowa. In the interview processes, we have at least 3 components, starting with screening practices. And the screening practices at this point have gone online, virtual. We use Google Meet, and we have been very successful. And I'll talk about that just a little while as far as using Google Meet for the interview processes. We still have training of interview teams on both best practices and anti-bias. It's very important that our interview teams, which are comprised of different stakeholders, whether they're administrators, teachers, support staff, and parents in some cases, we want to make sure that not only are we hiring the best, but our teams are trained into the kind of questions to ask and to check their biases at the door. For our instructional staff, we require instructional demo lessons. They have been on site typically. As we move to a remote environment, we have had the opportunity to have folks send in recorded lessons and different variety ways to still have demo lessons. And for support staff, we have come up with some tasks or demos, depending again on the position. If it's a position that might be in payroll or benefits, it could be a task on a spreadsheet. If it's a buildings and grounds person, it could actually be a task that they could do in like 30 minutes so that we can assess some of their skills. Final interviews are an important part of the process, and final interviews are typically for instructional staff conducted with Dr. Wood, building administrators, and the most qualified candidates that have come through the other parts of the process. The questions are challenging. The feedback that we've received from successful candidates and even candidates who have not perhaps been successful the first or second time in the interviews is that they really appreciate the thoroughness of the committee, the feedback that they receive, and the process. So then we have recommendation to the Board of Education, and that's where you come in, and we appreciate your questions and support. Appointment of the successful candidate. And it's not done at that point. I contact the candidate, we go through that process, but an important part that we're working with not only that work group that I mentioned at the beginning, but the HR staff is employee orientation onboarding. For several years, we've had instructional staff orientation. It is now 3 days, pretty comprehensive orientation. We have expanded in the last year for employee orientation and onboarding for all employees. And again, that is an introduction to Shenendehowa, our expectations of Shenendehowa, and setting them up for success. Employee engagement is ongoing. We again want to thank the board. We have had professional opportunities for our support staff as well as our instructional staff, and that will continue and has continued in a remote environment as we move along. And our next steps are progress monitoring for success. So there are employee evaluations in place. However, they always can be improved, particularly in the support staff, and that's what we're doing. Our second screen are some resources that we've used. So currently we are in the final stages of the Octave principal interviews, and that process was completed remotely, except for final interviews, which we did do with safe social distancing and masks in person. The Octane interview team comprised of stakeholders. You don't have to click on the links, but if the board wants to at some point, there are pictures of the Octane interview team, the Shen employee profile, and the actual anti-hiring practice video. What I would like to do is share, it's just about 2 minutes. Student voices are very important, and Anna Sugarman has led a student voice project in many of the buildings. I asked her to help us to come up with a video for the candidates for the Octane principal candidates, so they could get to hear a little bit about what the students are looking for in a principal. And this is a real small clip from the information that she gathered, and it had to be done virtually. The parents were very cooperative, and the students in the video were actually at their home. So if Dr. Robinson will indulge me and start the video. The sound isn't working.
It's not?
I don't hear any sound. Does anybody else hear any sound?
I don't hear any sound.
No sound.
We'll pause on that then, Joe.
Okay, so it is available for the board, and perhaps it will work. And if not, I can resend it. But Anna interviewed 4 students, and they shared what they're looking for in the next principalship, and they were very insightful. So I hope that you get a chance to look at that. So that concludes the hiring presentation.
Thank you, Mrs. Butch. Any comments from the board members?
I'll comment. I did watch the video. I found it adorable that the 3 students that commented that answered questions from Mrs. Sugarman, and especially the young man who said, when asked, how could you improve your school? And he said, nope, everything's good. I'm very happy. And the other 2 ladies had a very similar comment about field trips, but I really appreciate sharing. I know it was only a couple of questions that were shared, but I appreciate hearing their responses, and I think it's valuable to hear from the students, and thank you for that.
Any other questions, comments?
Bob, I also viewed the a video that had been prepared by Dr. Wood and on diversity and overcoming bias in practice, hiring practices, and I thought it was extremely effective. If we're utilizing that as part of a hiring practice, we're making strides.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Okay, please continue with the agenda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Presley. So I'll change screen, and at this point, we'll talk about the proposed 2021 budget. And again, I'll walk through it, and if there are questions you have, I'll certainly be more than happy to entertain those questions from the board. So just bear with me 1 second. So, Mr. Presley, are you able to see the screen at this point?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much for the board. This has been an interesting process, to say the least, for us, considering the uncertainties that we face as a state and as a school district. I want to start off with this first slide that kind of speaks to a larger purpose, and I'm going to go into it briefly in terms of what we continue to focus on. And you heard it tonight, ironically, from a lot of the presenters, trying to ensure that we provide an authentic experience for our students. And that's what the budget does. It's focusing on being inclusive, diverse, and axiomatic, which I'll go through those terms briefly. And also, we have to recognize that the budget is a strategic investment of resources. Strategic meaning we're always trying to be forward thinking by considering our current circumstances, and it's an investment. It's certainly probably the greatest investment I think that we can make in terms of preparing our young people for the next step. The information presented in this budget is based upon the approved state budget as of April 1st. I need to emphasize that because there's been a lot of chatter in terms of state downturn. To this point, we have yet to receive additional information. We anticipate additional information will be forthcoming, but right now this is based upon the approved state budget as of April 1st. So one of the things that we really focused on, again, to ensure that we stick to our true north, so to speak, as we go through this process, it is particularly important during a time of crisis that organizations and even individuals ground themselves to ensure that we're not making decisions based upon emotionality, based upon our own tolerance level for ambiguity, versus making a decision based upon the mission of the organization. And again, this slide is a depiction of the school district mission statement. And if someone were to read it, you'll see all these terms: engagement, innovation, culturally competent, global collaboration, collective working responsibility. All those things speak to the mission of Shenendehowa as a school district. So we want to make sure we maintain our true north as we go not only through the budget process, but quite frankly, as we go through this unprecedented time as a school system. What you have here is one of the goals that the board approved, the fiscal, the goals related to fiscal responsibility. And those keywords, those words are important. It's about fiscal responsible, recognizing that it's the responsibility of all employees to ensure that as a school organization that we're effective and we're effectively utilizing the resources that's being invested. You even heard tonight everything from the process Mrs. Bush outlined with HR to the process Mr. Colin outlined in terms of the resources we're trying to lend to students for our student athletes, to the processes outlined for our counselors, again, making sure that we're maximizing the expertise for the betterment of our students. So fiscal responsibility isn't necessarily about dollars and cents. It's quite frankly how well and how effectively are we using the resources that we're fortunate to have as a school community. This slide, in essence, really speaks to when we unpack the budget process, we look at a budget process through an equity lens. In other words, we want to make sure that diverse, and I'm just going to go through these three questions that really speak to that. The first notion of being axiomatic, that what else do we need to do to ensure equity and outcomes for all students? What I mean by equity and outcomes, that all students are succeeding in realizing their full potential. Again, revert back to one of the presentations tonight. You heard Mrs. Mylod spoke about the significant role that special education plays. And if we were to have any of our respective administrators and teachers and staff come, all of that will go to the axiomatic view in terms of, again, trying to ensure that we're trying to address the needs of all students. And it's important, particularly at this time, that we make these critical decisions, that we're not making a decision where a student or a group of students or a population of students become the sacrificial lamb. Recognizing that every parent send their child to school with blind faith that we're actually doing everything in their child's best interest. And so that's where that role comes into that. Which then speaks to the next piece about being inclusive. You know, what else we asking those critical questions? What else can we do to make our school and classroom experience more relevant to our students? And certainly we saw that come to a head with the virtual space, where all of a sudden, not only are we talking about what can we do here in school, but how do we make that experience for students at home relevant? And so the inclusive approach is a critical one. And then the next piece, the diverse piece, is how can we be more responsive to and capitalize on emerging changes and cultural shifts? Again, the virtual space has highlighted, I would say punctuated, the fact that we're way more diverse than we ever realized when we go from being in a classroom environment to all of a sudden we're in students' homes and students are in teachers' homes. And the relationships are much more authentic than any other time in the history of education. So again, it speaks to looking at our needs through an equity lens. As we go through the budget process, it's important that we recognize that we have to embrace this challenge, not only being tactical in terms of what are the things that we're doing immediate short term, but also being strategic. Consequently, we're taking a very multi-pronged approach to the challenge. And this approach comes based upon several premises. One is that we're trying to maintain the balance between program preservations, the things that we think and know and have proven to be effective and beneficial to our students, and recognizing where is that point when we start making reductions that we start having diminishing marginal returns. In other words, where's that point where the reductions are so severe that the impact of that program becomes, quite frankly, with you, a total misuse or ineffective use of resources. And we're juxtaposing that against ensuring that as a school system, we avoid making decisions that lends to a continued structural deficit as an organization. In other words, that hole that we can't fill by the prospect of future added revenues. And so it is a delicate balance between the two things, program preservation and the avoidance of a structural deficit. Because some people say, hey, just cut. Yes, cut may get you to a number, but cut, reduce programs to the point where, quite frankly, it's a misuse of funds to continue to fund certain things. And cut just simply creates a structural deficit that we will continue to face as a school district. Our goal is to get through this process, through this period of time, and continue to moving forward as a system. Consequently, we're looking at it from a multi-year perspective. We foresee the next 2 years, meaning the 2020-2021 budget that we're proposing tonight, as well as the 21-22, as being years where we have to be very strategic. We have to monitor our expenditures very closely. We have to look for opportunities to save, opportunities to right size as much as we possibly can. And we also have to then have some mechanisms, some levers, if you will, in place to deal with the fact that in a month or weeks from now, the state may announce certain deficits that at this point is being held off until further resolution in terms of federal funds or take foot. So we don't know what the next several weeks or months hold. However, we need to build a budget with certain contingencies, ability to leverage certain things to ensure that, again, we're not reducing programs midstream. And I'll comment on that further again as we go through the presentation. The next 3 to 5 years after that is when we hope that we'll be back as a society, globally and otherwise, that we can really start looking at right sizing and accelerating our ability to meet the emerging needs of our students and to further stabilize our fiscal capacity. So again, it's a 5-year view. And so as we sit here in 2020, our heads are already in 2025. What's going to be the implications of those things? And so therefore, we have to be very careful about the decisions that we make today, recognizing what we do today will impact tomorrow's opportunities. The 3 boxes that you see here, value added, cost effectiveness, and revenue and tax impact, essentially drive our entire thinking for the budget process. Anything that we do in the budget process, we talk about what's the value add. So we talk about academic capacity. So we look at everything from class size and composition. Composition means the various student needs. We're looking at equity and support. So we're looking at academic rigor. On the cost-effective side, we're constantly looking at strategic repurposing. How can we do things more effectively? How can we utilize resources in different ways to realize increased gain or larger impact? We look at personnel management, recognizing that we're in the people business. We hire people to do the job. So how do we look at some of those things? Again, ironically, Mrs. Bush spoke about different ways. We're looking at recruitment in different ways. We're looking at training. Even still in this virtual environment, those things continue. On the revenue side of it, clearly state aid is a good portion of our revenue, but the largest portion of our revenue comes from taxes. So we're always monitoring the impact of tax implication. I highlighted here in this particular, it's pink on my screen, in terms of looking at the true value tax rate over the past 3 years. This is what essentially translates to what people are paying in taxes, homeowners, residents, taxpayers are paying. And over the past 3 years, that actually has been negative. So largely for residents in the town, I'm just going to namely the town of Clifton Park and Half Moon, which makes up the largest portion of our school district. Those rates actually have been flat or negative over the last 3 years. And again, you'll hear me say it later on in the presentation. We anticipate that will be the case even so with this budget that we're proposing tonight. So how do we do that? We're taking a much more narrow scope when we look at our strategic investments for the budget. we're starting with probably our most salient tenet, which is the equity and outcomes. We want to ensure that service follow needs. And we also recognize that there's a tremendous potential that we may see more learning gaps because of the virtual space that we're now functioning in. And so how do we ensure then that we're anticipating some of those learning gaps and trying to ensure that we have the capacity to effectively address those gaps, not only into the fall, but quite frankly, even over the summer as well, in terms of potential virtual summer school, or if we have the capacity to return in any fiscal matter, some type of on-site virtual model over the course of the summer, as well as enrichment activities for our students. So a lot of work is being planned to try to address some of those learning gaps as early and as often as we can to minimize the impact moving forward on our students. And so that comes in the form of academic intervention supports, in the form of English as a new language for our E&L students, special education services, even acceleration services as well. One of the things that we always focus on a school district is looking forward. What are the options and opportunities that we need to build and develop for our students? How do we position our students for continued prosperity? And so looking at college and career options, the board approved 2 courses prior to COVID-19 that we're in the process of planning for, the financial literacy course. And we know that that's such a significant need for our student population, quite frankly, it's a significant need for most people to be financially literate. And so a course coming online related to that, and also of course looking at the healthcare careers. And ironically, when you think about the situation we're in now, the most essential most essential workers were our healthcare providers. And so certainly having those courses related to health careers is going to be critical as we move forward, because we saw the tremendous need over the last several months with the COVID-19 pandemic. We also know that mental health and wellness has always been a priority. It's always been a priority for this board. It's always been a priority for the school district. But we know that it's going to take on some added dimensions coming into the next school year. So we certainly want to continue that as a focus area for investments. And so a big part of that is how do we provide professional development? How do we provide some turnkey training opportunities so that as individuals come on board, we have more people with increased capacity to address the various needs of our students and also the various needs of our staff, recognizing that we'll also have adults that would need mental health supports as we transition to the next phase. Technology integration has proven itself over and over again. Quite frankly, has been the difference maker, and kudos to Ken McDermott and his team. They have done a tremendous job in terms of thousands of devices being distributed to our young people and to our staff and supporting those things throughout integration. So we certainly want to continue looking at the integration of technology not only to support a virtual learning platform, but to further support what we would do, what we call an on-site platform as well. So we're looking at those kind of things. We're looking at different learning management system, recognizing that systems that might be good for our older students may not be the best platform for our younger students. So we're in the process of assessing those things as we move forward. Safety continues to be a high priority for the school district. Certainly the ability for us to lock down our facilities is a major one. So we're in the process now of looking at particularly the middle school compound, as the 3 middle schools viewed as under one footprint. So we're looking at safety as a major consideration for this budget piece as well, and even communication. We're in the process right now of trying to solidify a process to send mass text messages via our communication system. So just give you an example of again, how all those things fall under the safety protocols. And the added dimension to the safety piece is personal protective devices and equipment. All those things will be a major part of our safety protocols as we look to transition to the new school year. Similar related to that, operation and maintenance is why it's there. We're looking at contractual pieces to make sure that our contractual pieces are in place, everything from HVAC equipment to how we service to ventilation. All those things become even more so important as we are learning from the experiences of the last 2 months and planning for the foreseeable future. So certainly operation and maintenance continue to be a major part of our planning process. And so as we think about all the things we're trying to invest and ways we also then think about how do we save costs. I use the word term leveraging resources. In other words, when we see opportunities to continue doing the things that we're doing, but also some opportunities for reinvestment is what we're trying to do. So we have 18 instructional staff members slated to retire at the end of the school year. As a result of the difference between what people are going out at and what we're anticipating hiring, backfill some of those positions, we'll be backfilling 15 of the 18 positions. 3 of them as a result of just some shifts in enrollments, we will not be backfilling. So again, not only do we look at the positions, but we look at how do we backfill, what do we backfill, what capacity we're looking for, what value add are we looking for those individuals coming on board. So it's not only the monetary difference, but the value add that individuals bring to the table as we fill some of those positions. So from a leveraging resource piece, we're looking at about $753,000 in savings that we use, again, to offset the what we call the typical operational increases in the budget, as well as any investments that we try to infuse, as I mentioned before, in the various categories. The other side of that piece as well is that we look how do we right-size our budget, right-size our operations through restructuring. And so we look at vacant positions. So we're looking to make some reductions in staff through attrition. Again, vacant positions. And so we look across all employee groups and look at all the various vacant positions, from part-time and hourly to term to leave position to some restructuring of administrative capacity to retirements. And coming up with what we have here is 11.55 FTE. It's full-time equivalent. In other words, it may not necessarily be 11 bodies. In fact, it's more than 11 bodies. Actually, let me back up. It's 11 positions because they're all vacant positions. So we're looking at that capacity, and that yields about $759,000 in reduction that we're looking to again mitigate the impact of this budget. So the point I'm making with this is that when we look at the budget process, we truly do look at all aspects of the budget and asking ourselves a question: one, what's the value add of doing one thing versus the other? And 2, when do we meet that critical point of diminishing returns where the investment itself, quite frankly, become not on the best use of resources? And so where's that break point, so to speak? And so reductions, these are some of the reductions that we're looking to present in this particular budget. On the other side of the coin, we also have some huge big ticket items that we always have to monitor closely. Health insurance is one of those big ticket items. And we're very fortunate through the shrewd management of Kathy Chase and her team and participating in the consortium that right now we're looking at our health insurance costs being basically a flat line from this current year going into the next year. And when you think about what most places are facing with significant increased costs in health insurance, for us to say that our cost is flatline is a significant statement in itself. And so we're certainly trying to minimize the impact of that growth on the budget. Similarly, when we look at pension costs, the board was wise several years ago to establish reserves to offset those increases. And so again, those increases in the pension costs are being mitigated by the reserves that we established several years ago. So, and that's exactly the purpose of having reserves. So particularly when you have these critical situations that you don't find yourself cutting critical services to offset mandated costs, so to speak. And so certainly this is one of those major steps that there were done, steps that were taken in the past that are paying tremendous dividends in the current and also into the future. And we're in the process now of finalizing some extension with our CSEA bargaining unit, again, to try to preserve that unit and also to contain costs moving to the next school year. This slide is somewhat difficult to see because of the small numbers, but this gives a categorization of our major expense category. Instructional expenses, as you can imagine, is our largest portion of our budget. So direct instructional expenses, our instructional staff, is about 36% of our budget, about $64 million projected. Administrative expensive is the smallest portion of our budget at 3.2%, a little over almost $6 million for administrative. And administrative doesn't necessarily mean administrators. It's all the cost that goes into various things. Some of it could be contractual services as well as salaries that goes into that particular line. The non-instructional is our next largest category. And again, when you think about it, the two largest population of employees we have are instructional employees and our non-instructional employees. That's roughly about 16.5% of the budget, about 29, almost $30 million. So to put things in context, probably about 85% of our budget is salary and benefits, because again, we're in the business, we hire people to be in front of kids, to interact with kids, to support the needs of our students. The equipment is a small portion of the budget, less than 0.5%. So again, these shares, what I call these shares, are important because as we look from year to year, and if you look at the Shen budget sequence, I could certainly speak for the last 14 years, this 15, is that those shares are typically in the same proportion. And the reason why I look at that, because we want to ensure that we're providing an even experience for our kids from one year to the next versus an uneven one. In other words, we don't want to have a good year, bad year, good year, bad year. We want to have a very even experience for our kids, recognizing that while many dynamics are changing, we want the quality experience for our students to be even from one year to the next year. And that's the reason why we pay quite a lot of attention to the shares, to making sure that we're again taking a very moderated look at the budget process. So with that being said, I'm just going to scroll down. Right now, we're looking at a budget proposal again at $181,657,429. This slide gives you a better depiction. When you think about our budget, the just what we call the operational, in other words, continue doing the things that we're doing in the budget, is about 2.3%. And between all those leveraging and savings, the net impact is about 0.1% reduction. So we're looking at a budget that's, even though the operational impact is 2.31, the net increase of our budget is going to be 2.21. So again, part of that is how do we preserve program? Going back to the first slide, preserving program recognizes some right sizing, and again, ensuring that we're not creating a structural deficit for ourselves as a system moving forward, because it's just an old adage, we don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish. We don't want to make a decision today that seemed to be costly, a decision today that seemed to be politically popular, that's going to be a tremendous cost. And the cost not only comes in terms of price tag, the cost come in terms of the erosion of quality programming and services for our students. So the proposal that we have on the table for tonight for the consideration for the board is 2.21%. To put that in context for the board and for our viewers, we look at a 5-year average window in terms of budget progressions. And when you look at that 5-year average, the 5-year average is 2.2. This is at 2.21. And again, you see a lot of consistency. And I think that when you think about Shenendehowa as a school system, certainly I can say, at least for the past decade, we have had one of the lowest per pupil costs, not only in the region, but across the state. And it's because we're very intentional about how we look at a budget process. We're very intentional in terms of program planning. We're very intentional in terms of monitoring our progress, not only from academic progress, but also from a fiscal progress. And it goes back to the goal of fiscal responsibility is everyone's responsibility. And so when you look at some of the trend data for the system, you'll see some very common trends, even through some of our most challenging times, what people call the former recession period with the economic downturn in the real estate market several years back, are going to gap elimination adjustments. And if you go back to that point, you see a very moderated viewpoint of the budget process to, again, to ensure that as a school system, we continue to be a quality program for our students. We continue to also be a quality resource for our community, recognizing that the housing value of our community is largely contingent upon the reputation and the success of a school district. And certainly the market space within the Shen School District has shown tremendous stability in housing value over the years. So I put all that in the sequence because the budget is more than just what we're going to spend as a school system. The budget is what does this reflect the larger community that we represent and the investment that we're so grateful that the community makes in the school district from year after year. So to put that in context, the big piece that we have, the big question to be answered right now is this middle column based upon, this is what we have as a 4-1 based upon the governor's budget. Again, we anticipate some news coming forward. The question is, what's that reduction? Right now, the reduction that was in the budget from last year was essentially a freeze on our foundation aid back to the prior year. So instead of seeing an increase, that was frozen. And so for Shen, that was about $350,000 or $360,000 freeze. So again, we're waiting to see what's going to transpire in terms of what the state budget, once the federal government makes some decision on the incentive. And I share that with you because unfortunately, a lot of those processes are often spoke about in the political realm, and people fail to realize that they have direct impact on people. And so as we look at the budget sequence, we're thinking about the people impact, not only our students, but also our community members. And so that's why when we think about investment that's being made, it's investment of local dollars, it's the investment of state dollars, it's the investment of federal dollars. It's our responsibility to ensure that we're good stewards of those investments. And so we're building this budget, recognizing that we could see some changes in the state progression. The tax impact is the greatest. 71% of our revenue comes from tax levy. And so the tax levy impact we're seeing is right now at this point is 2.61%. As proposed in the budget, and I'm going to put that in the context for a second. There are several other revenue pieces that goes along with that. We have some federal revenues that comes from some Medicaid reimbursement, and so we're looking forward to those type things. We're also looking at some possible revenues that come from interest, and this is an interesting one. There's somebody say, "Wow, why are we budgeting $500,000 for interest versus last year?" Last year we were somewhat tentative about the market space. And based upon where we are right now, mid-year, for a school district, we were almost $700,000 in interest income. And so what we're budgeting is actually a step down from the projection that we're on. And also there's an anticipation that the market space for dollars will shift significantly once business come in, and the right sizing of the market space, the stock market becomes a high priority. So interest income is one that we're going to watch very closely as we move for our system. Again, to put things in further context, 10 years ago as a school district, we were at about $1.5 million in interest income. So while that number may seem large in comparison to the prior year, it's still a very small amount in relationship to past interest gained from investments. So that's one area that we're going to monitor very closely as we move forward. The three at the bottom that's here, the general fund is the unappropriated fund balance, and I'm pointing that out because I'll come back to that point in a second. Right now, from fund balance, we contribute $1.5 million to the budget sequence. That serves as a potential lever for us if we see a significant reduction in state aid beyond what has already transpired from the April 1st state budget. So that's one of those levers that we'll use to avoid making significant reductions in program mid-year, because that's the last thing we want to do is make mid-year cuts in programs and services for our students. The two that you see here, the retirement reserve and employee reserve, goes back to the slide where I mentioned the mitigating of our pension costs. And again, through the wisdom and the support of the board, several years ago, we approved those reserves, and over the years have incrementally contributed to those reserves to, again, support, especially times like these where we're going through a very catastrophic situation and a very uncertain financial future. So this is where those two reserves come into play to add to our revenue stream. So this is the other side of the expenditure coin that we referred to earlier. To put the budget in context for the board, certainly the board and the community, several years ago, the state passed the tax cap legislation. The tax cap calculation for Shen for the proposed 2020-21 school year is 3.04. The tax levy that we're proposing is 2.6%. So that's almost a 0.5% below the tax cap limit that's allowable by the current tax cap law. And that's about $548,000 less than the tax cap. And we have received over the years some criticism, people saying you're leaving money on the table. However, the reality of it is we've always budgeted from the standpoint of trying to address our needs from a fiduciary responsibility piece of it, as well as a program responsibility piece of it. And so while we have some margins remaining, what we're proposing at 2.6% is what we're proposing from a fiscal responsibility aspect that aligns with our program responsibility aspect. This same graphic, the same chart, just put those two things in perspective in terms of the tax cap driven by the budget as at 3.04, the proposed budget tax levy at 2.21, and then the delta between those two things. Again, same information, just put in a different graphical format for ease of understanding. On the revenue side, again, similar type thing, just want to emphasize the revenue piece of it, having taxes being a significant portion of our revenue stream as a school district. Conversely, there are school districts based upon economic capacity that see state aid as the largest portion of their revenue. Shen is about 27% from state aid, 70% from taxes, and the remainder from various other revenue sources. The big piece I want to emphasize with this, and yes, it's somewhat early, however, we have ran some numbers, and we estimate that the tax impact on homeowners, there's one thing to say the tax levy. The tax levy is the amount of taxes that we would generate to support the proposed budget. The tax impact is what taxpayers will pay. And as I said before, at least certainly the last 2, could be the last 3 years, the tax impact for homeowners, and again, looking at the town of Clifton Park and the town of Half Moon, that consists of the largest portion of our student population, those tax rates and tax impacts have been relatively flat. In fact, the best example of this, most people received their state check back last year as a result of us having a tax levy and a tax impact that was lower than the prior year. So for just as a point of reference. And again, we're looking at right now that the tax impact for the average homeowner is going to be less than 0.1% potential increase, but more likely that number is going to be a minus. But again, just taking a conservative view of that, 0.0729%, less than 0.1% on a very conservative piece of it. We anticipated it actually would be a reduction in terms of what taxpayers will pay next year on their tax bills. And so how are we doing all that? 4 key objectives that I want to summarize all that I've said to the board. 4 key objectives that we have taken with this budget process. And again, remember, the budget is a multi-year process. We're looking back to the prior year, we're looking at the current year, and then we're looking ahead 5 years in this case. And so it is truly a multi-year process that we're taking. The first objective is preserving programs. We're in the business of providing a quality experience to our students. So preserving program quality is priority 1, and recognizing that the budget we're proposing, it will be tighter in some areas for next year than, quite frankly, just some people may like. However, it's a budget that in most cases is very doable. In some cases, we would be doing some restructuring to meet the needs and demands of students, but certainly preservation of program is priority 1. The second priority or objective that we're trying to do with this budget is the reasonable tax impact. Again, we appreciate the investment that the community has made in the Shen district. Certainly, I can only speak for the last 14 years, but tremendous support from the taxpayers in this community. And so we want to be very cognizant of that and having a budget that yields a reasonable tax impact. And that's where that 0.0729%, again, less than 0.1% impact is what we're anticipating. And we really do anticipate that final tax bills will see a reduction from the prior year, recognizing, again, tax bills won't be assessed or calculated until July, August timeframe, but just based upon the analysis of prior years, that's what we're anticipating. So there's a high degree of confidence that we'll be able to meet that mark as we move forward. The tricky parts of the budget is item 3 and 4, recognizing that we need to have levers in place to deal with anticipated reduction in state aid. Those levers occur on both sides of the equation, the expenditure side of the equation and the revenue side of the equation. On the expenditure side of the equation, we have a budget line for debt service. So debt service from a layperson perspective is our mortgage payment. One of the things that we've been very astute with debt service is trying to retire debt, pay off our loans, so to speak, in a very sensible, very strategic way. In other words, when we bring a new capital project online, we bring that project online as debt is reducing. So let me give you an example of my household. We just paid off one vehicle, one of the 2 vehicles in my household, even though I have 4 drivers. And so now, as we're contemplating if we need a 3rd car, it's easier to bring a 3rd car into the sequence and still only have 2 car payments. And so I use that example of when we look at debt service, we try to manage debt in that sequence as well. So we recognize that our debt service over the coming years will actually be on a decline. And so it creates an opportunity that if we see a significant reduction in state aid, that's one lever that we can use to reduce our expenditure exposure without, again, cutting into program delivery. On the revenue side of the equation, that's why I pointed out the unappropriated fund balance. As we get to the end of this year and to calculate what's our fund balance potential carryover into next year, if, again, we're seeing a significant reduction in state aid, that's another lever opportunities that we can do. I caution against that one, though, because it becomes a recurring theme. In other words, we have to be careful that whatever we do one year, we're able to repeat it the next year and or undo it the next year, because otherwise we're then creating this structural deficit that will hamstring us moving forward as a system. And that's why that multi-year look is important. That 3 to 5 year look is important for us. And so while we have those levers in place, how we use those levers, or if we have to use those levers, is going to be after careful consideration and a lot of analysis in terms of what is there, what if we do this today in this year, what's the implication for the next several years coming down the road? Because we need to know that before we make a recommendation, and not having a situation where in 2 years we're asking the public to pass budgets with ridiculous tax implications, which is something we never will do. And that's the reason why we're taking this very measured approach to the budget process. So this objective number 3 is something that we've always done. It's particularly punctuated now during this current unprecedented time. And it's a very precarious position that we find ourselves in terms of trying to figure out what's going to be the state fiscal gap and what's going to be the implication for federal infusion of additional dollars to the state, which ultimately translate to potential infusion or lack, or should I say, minimize the reduction in state aid for school districts. So a lot of moving parts, and we have to have levers to address those moving parts. This isn't one of those things where we say, are we lucky, are we leading? We have to lead with data. We have to lead with very thoughtful deliberations, and that's objective 3. Objective 4 speaks very much to that. We have a responsibility to not only do, as number 1 said, to preserve program. We have a responsibility to the community to ensure that the district is fiscally healthy. And particularly, we have to ensure that we're fiscally healthy to deal with the ripple effects of the fiscal situation. And we're seeing it right now. And I say that not to compare Shen to any other school district, even though sometimes people will. You'll see, and you'll already start reading about school districts that are making dramatic reductions in their budget. We can't say, well, just because our neighbor is doing A, we have to do A as well. Everyone's situation is different, and I can only speak to the situation here at Shen. We've always been focused on being fiscally healthy, fiscally responsible as a school district. We've always focused on having a multi-year perspective on our budget process. And because of that, we've been able to weather a lot of these storms that we've encountered as a system. And this is no different. In fact, because of some of the steps, almost akin to the comment that our counselors made, because of some steps we've taken in the past, we're better positioned to deal with some of these situations as we move forward. But again, this is not to say it's easy. This is not to say it's a done deal. It's to say to the board that we're taking those steps to keep position our school district as a place that we could continue to provide a quality program services to our students, and as a place where from a fiscal impact on our taxpayers is fairly flatlined from one year to the next. So with all that being said, these are the propositions that will go to the voters on June 9th. We have a budget proposition of $181,657,429. We have the proposition for purchasing bus. This was presented earlier to the board. And just for the purpose of people might be listening in, we have a very, very comprehensive bus replacement process to ensure that, one, we have quality fleet all the time, two, that our fleet doesn't become a cost burden. In other words, again, I'm using the analogy, it's trying to hold on to that old car too long where you spend more money paying for it to be in the shop than in service. And so we have, under the leadership of Al Karam, a very comprehensive maintenance and bus replacement process as well. And all this is reimbursed at a very high rate. So for every dollar that we spend, we're almost getting 70 cents back on the reimbursement for buses. So very cost-effective way, and we certainly want to monitor that and utilize that as we move forward. We also have 2 seats, 3-year terms on the Board of Education. We have Mrs. Naomi Hoffman, who's also running again, and Mrs. Gusta Miller are the 2 incumbents right now as well on the board. I'll talk about the other candidates in a second. As Mr. Presley mentioned before, this year is unprecedented in many ways for school districts, and one of those big areas is the vote in the election process by absentee ballot only. We already have over 1,000 people who have completed the portal to ensure that they're getting a ballot, and we're assessing to making sure that we don't have duplicates going out and things of that nature. At the end of it, we probably end up sending out over 25,000 ballots. And as Mr. Press alluded before, in a typical budget year, we only get about 2,500. So when you think about that, it's probably more than tenfold the amount of ballots that we're sending out in comparison to the average over the past 3 to 5 years of our budget vote. However, we're doing that to ensure that people have the opportunity to vote. The ballots will be distributed some point prior to June 2nd. It's a pretty extensive process because you have to remember, statewide, everyone is doing this. So every organization, every print houses, every mail houses are inundated with the process of trying to prepare ballots for school districts across the state to go out in a timely fashion. Kudos to Mrs. Chase, Anita Adamchek, who's our deputy district clerk, and a lot of folks in the business office, HR office, a lot of people spending countless hours cross-referencing addresses, names to ensure that, again, we have a comprehensive list to go out. One of the big changes that also occurred with the governor's executive order was a change in the process for board candidates. Eliminating or waiving the petitions requirement. And so right now, listed in alphabetical order, we have 7 individuals who have submitted the form to run for the board, and the names are listed there. And so those names will be a part of the ballot that will be going out. Again, prior to June 2nd, I cannot tell anyone right now exactly what date they'll be getting their ballots in their house, because it's a matter of the printing, the mail, and the sequence. However, the goal is to have ballots in respective households by June 2nd, because those ballots need to be returned to the school district by June 9th at 5 p.m. And the 5 p.m. deadline is not the school district's, it's not a Shenendehowa rule. It's a part of the existing education law that dictates the voting requirements. And so certainly we adhere to those type things. Just some other points of note: that a postcard has already been issued. It's in the process of being distributed to households right now, that gives some of the same information I just articulated, that speaks to who's a qualified voters, also give the link for people to drop their names in the portal. And as I said before, we have a lot of people already starting to do that process to ensure that they receive a ballot to their respective household, to ensure that they're part of the 25,000 plus that we'll be sending out. The absentee ballots will have a return postage on it, trying to be economical through the arrangements with the post office. The district is charged for ballots that's actually returned. So for those people who want to say, how do we avoid waste? Again, we're thinking about those things, even to that point that we're not wasting taxpayers' resources unnecessarily. So kudos to the U.S. Postal Service, which has been a tremendous help, recognizing the uniqueness of the situation, to having so many mail-in go out in a region or even across the state at the same time. So kudos to those folks who are engaged in that process. And so the deadline is the 9th of June. We just received advice today from legal counsel that we can start the counting of ballots the morning of June 9th. More details to that to come. However, we will probably live stream that process, so it become a transparent process, so people could see the process. If someone wants to watch from 8 o'clock in the morning till, I'm sorry, it's going to be, I think our hours going to be from 9 to 8, or 8 to 9. I'm not sure if we finalize those hours now. If somebody wants to watch the entire process all day, they could certainly watch the entire process all day. We'll be getting, and the board will be asked to appoint election inspectors on the May 26th board meeting. So again, the process is one that's going to be handled by certified election inspectors, with the district clerk being in attendance as well. So again, making the process very transparent and ensuring that the process is done with utmost integrity becomes a major point for us, particularly again in this absentee ballot only vote. As well. And then the budget notice will go out after the public hearing, which will be held on May 26th. So those are the required voting. By the way, the posting and the mailings that we're sending out is 2 more mailings than we have ever sent out before. So all those things are added costs. However, those are things that we're doing to ensure that the process is completed with fidelity as we move forward. So I'll stop there. If there are questions from the board, I'd be more than happy to try to address those questions. I'll leave the presentation on in case I need to revert back to a screen based upon the questions from the board members.
Any questions from board members?
Bob, I actually don't have a question. I just wanted to express my appreciation for the process we've gone through. A couple of weeks back, I think I talked about fantasy and unreality of the budget. We weren't really we did not have a budget at the time, but we were talking about things that would ultimately guide the formation of a budget. But we were essentially operating in almost a vacuum as far as information, and we were also operating under the law in terms of the sequence of events that had to take place. And so we had to go forward regardless of the fact that it was probably very premature to be trying to do what we were doing at the time. Now we have a reality. There's no question about it. There's still questions, but there's a reality. And I think it's absolutely amazing, the budget that's been put together. We're not only preserving programs and meeting needs as they arise, we are being very careful about what we ask from our taxpayers, knowing that the economy is in somewhat rough shape and may get worse before it gets better. And we preserved the ability to deal with cuts that may very well come down the road. It's kind of, in one respect, we're hoping for the best and preparing for the worst. And I just think it's a terrifically balanced, sane approach that does the best job possible. I'd like to congratulate Dr. Robinson and the entire team that put this thing together.
Any other comments?
If I could add, thank you, Gary, for sharing. I'd like to say, and everyone already knows this, and that is we're navigating at an unusual time. We're breaking new ground and understand that the need to pivot will be needed, not knowing where state aid will land or what will happen with future tax revenue. I understand how challenging it is to look forward and trying to plan. Thankfully, we have reserves. There was foresight in doing that that exists that will help us navigate these murky waters. I very much appreciate your strategy of looking out in phases and having a plan for addressing reductions in state aid. Using levers, you mentioned the expenditure lever specific to debt service and the revenue lever for the unappropriated fund balance. Those are the examples you provided, all while making it a priority. And this is what I think is very important. That is to preserve programs without creating a structural deficit. And from what you shared, this budget has a goal of doing that, preserving programs and being sensitive to educational quality and equity. And thank you on my part for being very patient and explaining the process of how we got to where we are today. I understand there's many unknowns even now, but we have a very good starting point and wanted to thank you for that.
Okay, any other questions, comments? I've got one thing I'd like to add is that this has been the most unusual year for us because what's happened at state and state to national, I can't even describe it as a legal process, a policy process, or even a negotiation. I would call it a game of chicken with people's lives between national and state government. And what was very consistent from you, Dr. Robinson, you were always telling us the importance of keeping programs in place. If we cut up programs, we're letting go of people, and we create a huge cost in terms of instability as an organization. You're very clear. We wanted to keep the programs as we have them today, and I think you showed it on pages on the budget that we're not having to ask people to be considered for layoffs. We have some backup with the reserves as a couple more iterations of this game of chicken may come through, but I think we're well prepared to deal with that if it does come through. So thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? So I think that's it for superintendent comments. Let's shift over to action items. The first item
let me transition to the agenda, Mr. Presley, on the screen.
Okay. Sounds good.
You should see it now.
I see it now. So first item, and this is something we just finished talking about, adoption of 2020-2021 budget proposition. Can I have a motion to bring this to the floor?
Motion.
Second it.
A second from Mrs. Rajat, who had the first?
Naomi did.
First from Mrs. Hoffman, second from Mrs. Rajat. We've had a lot of comments and questions. Any others? If not, all in favor, raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Motion passes for the item A. And next item is the adoption of the property tax report card. Do we have a copy of it we can show up?
It's in a rough format document. It's printed from an SED portal. So and again, this is what we'll submit this. We submit it. So this is one of those SED, and again, it's reflecting a lot of the information you saw tonight, the proposed budget, the tax levy, all those, and basically all the pieces you saw tonight on the budget piece is a part of this tax cap report card. The budget 2.21, the tax levy 2.6.
Motion, Bob.
Motion for Mr. DeLallo. Any seconds?
Mr. Gilbert.
Second for Mr. Gilbert. Any comments, questions on the property tax report card? If not, all in favor, raise your hand. Say aye. Aye. Any nays? Do we have any nays? Have not heard any, so motion carries. Third item is staffing from Mrs. Bush. You can see it up there.
Two
Two
retirements.
retirements.
Yes, two retirements. Thank you. I'll just acknowledge real quickly. Walter Chakowski is retiring after 20 years as a music teacher. He's been at Octay. And Maureen Whalen is retiring after 32 years, elementary teacher, currently kindergarten at Chango.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I have a motion on accepting the staffing recommendations?
Motion.
Motion from Mrs. Hoffman is one. Second? Mr. Gilbert? So any comments, questions? All right. All in favor? Raise your hand. Say aye.
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 Okay. Any nays? Motion carries on the staffing recommendations. So two quick announcements for me. Just I may have missed this at the beginning, but we did hold an executive session prior to the meeting to discuss several personnel matters. And the last thing is the implementation of the budget. The budget vote continues. If you're talking to anybody out there and people have any doubts about getting a ballot, please explain to them the simplicity of the link and making sure that no one becomes a disenfranchised voter out of the process. That's it from me in terms of announcements. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
I motion.
Mrs. Rajat first, any second?
I'll
Mrs.
second.
Miller.
Hoffman seconds, and so all in favor to adjourn?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? No nays. Motion carries. Meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll stop recording and
everyone.
disconnect the live as well.
Goodbye.